Yep.
Alright. So, assuming that you took some bracketed photos on your tripod and whatnot, you're then taking them over to your computer and you're opening up Luminance HDR. And then when you hit new image you get the HDR creation wizard, and you can select these 3 brackets of an HDR photo. You can see how there's, it's a good starting place to check if there was any slight wiggle in your tripod before you took these. And then the next thing you're going to do is you're going to turn on Hugin, the auto align images. And if you did this, then it's going to create the HDR image. And it'll spin for a while and create this. And then you will have it pop up, and you can save it at different sizes to different places. But it takes a while, and we're not going to look at that. And you're not actually going to use this for bracketed photos, because we have 54 of these to do, and they're very slow files. So you're going to want to use the batch tool, which will do all of them over the course of an hour or so for you. So if you go to Tools, under Batch HDR, you can set the file that you want this to record as. Generally, you want EXRs, which are the sort of industry standards. You can then say auto align, and then you're just going to select the file that your camera raw files are in, or the folder your camera raw files are in, and an output folder. And you're also setting how many brackets you have. So if you took 3 brackets or 5 brackets or whatnot, you might increase that. We're taking them at 3 brackets. And what this means is you have to have exactly a number of files in this folder divided by 3, because it's expecting 3 files for 1, 2, 3, and then 3 more files for 4, 5, 6. So you have to end up with a divider thing of multiple of 3. So if you did all that, you would now have this next folder, which is where we have the output, which is where I output all my EXRs. And now this is a file that is very fun to see in Blender. So again, I'm opening Blender, and I switch to the image editor to view the file. I can just drag it in, and it's going to go very slow. And now we get this file, and the image doesn't actually look very perfect. But that's because we now have a very complex, hard to understand file full of very interesting color data. And I'm still not totally well versed in this, but you're dealing with scene referred color versus display referred color. And so scene referred is, for any given pixel, how accurate is it to what you wanted as the output versus how much of it was destroyed in the creation. So an HDR file that you're using for environment lighting is very different from a tone mapped HDR, meaning that you stuck these files together just to make a pretty looking photo. And that's what normally people think of as HDR photography, is just photos that look really sharp and cool because you bracketed it. But that is not the case.
So let me ask you about that. So the difference between the pretty photo that you wanted to print and this here, that decision point came in Luminance when you chose what sort of file to save as?
To some extent, it was Luminance. To some extent, it's the program we used. So for instance, Photoshop has HDR support. And what that means in their mind is they're bringing in 3 bracketed photos, turning them into one super photo. So on your underexposed photo, you can get these really sharp, crisp highlights in the clouds, and then you're throwing away your dark, muddy shadows of that underexposed one. And then on the high end, you can get these really crisp looking shadows everywhere, but then you throw away your blasted out cloud light. And so that means the photo is the end product, but for 3D what we want is an environment map as the end product, wherein the file format stores the actual lighting information to some extent. And you can see this in Blender when you click on this file now. It's going to have very strange, actually I didn't open, oh yeah, if you open it and switch to icons, Blender actually usually has an even better version of this. I'll try 19, I think that has the sun in it. Photos where you have the sun in it are really good to test because Usually that is the hottest, whitest part of a photo. So, this was actually an old one. I think I made these out of jpegs. I've been shooting one of these almost every day now. And when you're getting started, just prepare yourself. You're probably going to have to mess it up a few times before you make a good HDR, especially considering how heavy these files are. So you're probably going to have to make 4 gigs to 8 gigs of CR2 files and EXR files. And then if you want to do another one, which you do want to do more of, so that you can learn the process better, you end up throwing that away and starting over. Let me look at this one. Yeah, so this one was made out of CR2 files. And you can immediately see the difference, which is everything is super, super totally blown out with white. If I open up my panel property, if you click on this, you can look at the RGB values down here, and to some extent the luminance, and you can see that you have represented in this file format a lot more information than white equaling 1 and black equaling 0. You can also change the color space. And XYZ supposedly has a lot more info. So you can see the RGB values are like 1.4, 4.5. And if I clicked on a picture of the sun, it might be something like 80, 20, 40. Really crazy values. So that means you're doing something right. If this EXR file has very strange color values. Another thing you can do is use DC Raw. So DC Raw is another program that is out there and is kind of a good standard for EXR because it's trying to make sure that it's trying to be the best answer to what the heck is all that information in your dense camera raw file. Because a lot of different programs interpret it differently. So if you download DC Raw, it then is a command line program. So you can run something like, let's see, so I'm going to go to my So I'm going into my CR2 file. Now I can list all the CR2 files. Now if I type in DC Raw, it'll tell you all the command line stuff you can do. So V prints a verbose message about what you're doing, minus, and it also lets you write a lot of things. So I can write minus E for extract an embedded thumbnail image. I can write it to a 16-bit TIFF and that'll have the info and it will be a little more viewable. So you can do stuff like DC Raw, minus V, minus E. So I'm getting a verbose message, I'm writing all the JPEG thumbnails, and I'll just do a multiply sign so it does it to all the files in the current directory. It's going to generate all these thumbnails, right? This is just another thing that you should consider diving into and playing with if you're messing around with this. So now I have all these thumbnails of my CR2 images, and I can see them a lot better. What I'm trying to say is that this is a very big subject. And I have barely bitten off a little bit. I'm trying to regurgitate this crop milk for you
Time
guys.
it'll all come out.
So now, let's say we did that batch on Luminance, and now we have this whole file full of EXRs. Now we can run Hugin and try stitching these together. So Hugin is the next open source program that you're going to be using for this. Let me close my currently running one.
All these programs run on different operating systems.
Yeah, it should work on Windows and Linux at the very least. I think it works on Mac.
Program's called Hugin.
Yeah, Hugin or Hugin or Hugin.
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 Does Photoshop have a stitch feature?
They have a new one. I'm still on like Photoshop CS5 or 3 or something, depending on your computer. So I always feel bad because I'm like, Max sucks. My opinion of it is based off of Macs from 10 years ago. Or now they probably do have the feature that I think Blender has and they don't. So let's open up Hugin or Hugin. If you go to View, that's not it. Or if you go to Interface, you can go Simple, Advanced, Expert. We're going to start with Simple, because in my experience, that's where I get the best results. We're not going to stitch our EXRs today because since they're a lot heavier, it's a lot slower. And so hopefully by